Okay, so welcome to everyone to this FENS webinar on brain research in animals models. Let's talk about it. So today we are a lot, 200. So it's a real pleasure to see that people are really concerned by this subject. So before introducing the speakers, I will briefly introduce myself. So I am Armelle Rancillac, a neuroscientist working at INSERM at the Collège de France in Paris. The purpose of my research is to better understand how sleep works, and therefore I use mice as an animal model. It is currently not possible for me to use other computational or organoid models, so I am convinced that in the long run, my research could benefit to a third of the population suffering from sleep disorders. And that's why today I am moderating this webinar, a 60-minute online event that aims to promote responsible and transparent communication regarding the use of animals in scientific research. So this webinar aims to equip researchers who employ animals in their study, as well as communication staff at research institutions, with the necessary tool to effectively communicate with a broader audience. Indeed, it is not easy to communicate the needs of researchers to the general public, especially when it involves animals. So by promoting open scientific practices and highlighting the importance of animal models, this webinar aims to encourage informed discussion about research ethics, the benefits of animal studies, and the protection of animal use in scientific activities. So today, we will have the pleasure to listen first to Dr. Christina Dalla, who will speak about how to communicate your research to the general public when animals are involved. So you will gain valuable insight on effective communication strategies for discussing animal research work to a wider audience, enhancing public understanding and engagement. So Dr. Christina Dalla is an associate professor at the Department of Pharmacology, Medical School at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. She is past president of the Hellenic Society for European Neuroscience and president-elected of the Mediterranean Neuroscience Society. She is also a member of the board of directors of the European Brain Foundation. She is a section editor at the European Journal of Neuroscience and member of the FENS Communication Committee with me. And she's a member of ECNP, Educational Committee. Her work focuses on sex differences in animal model of depression and novel pharmacological treatments. Then this webinar will continue with Dr. Roman Stilling. He will shed light on the existing research policy on animal research in the European Union and their impact on the broader brain community research, including individuals affected by brain conditions. So Dr. Stilling will explore how research advancements shape advocacy and outreach to different stakeholders and policymakers. So Dr. Roman Stilling studied life science at the University of München and neuroscience at the International Max Planck Research School in Göttingen, in Germany. He received his PhD in 2013 at the European Neuroscience Institute of Göttingen, and then worked on the microbiome-brain interaction as a postdoc at the APC Microbiome Institute in Cork, Ireland. Since September 2016, he works on the Informative Institute initiative, the Terversuch verstehen, so meaning the animal research, which is coordinated by the Alliance of Science Organizations in Germany. So during the presentations, please ask all your questions in the Q&A section. And following the two presentations, there will be answer and question session, allowing you to interact with the speakers. Well, as your microphones are muted, I will ask the question for you. So thank you all for attending today, and thanks the FENS for organizing this webinar, which is a joint initiative of two FENS committees, the Communication Committee and the Committee of Animal Research, the CARE. So now I'm pleased to let Christina talk.
Thank you, Armelle, very much for the introduction. And I will share a minute. Okay, I would like to thank you all very much for joining us today. And of course, thank FENS and the two committees for this invitation. I'm very happy to talk to you today, and I hope you will find our tips about how to communicate your research useful. And please ask your questions at the end. So what is science communication? And of course, there are many different definitions. And one that I prefer is that it refers to the process of effectively relaying the facts and findings from scientific studies, from our experiments, to other scientists and non-experts in general. So these non-experts could be anyone, could be your friends, your family, but of course, it could also be journalists, the media, and of course, politicians who are also responsible for policy making. This process, that you probably know the term from your grant writing, is called dissemination. And it's a process of disseminating the facts about current research and findings that can help people understand its broader implications for the society. So this also answers why to do that, why spend time communicating your research and energy and really spend all this effort on this. And we believe that there are many reasons to communicate your science. First of all, for me, the most important is to educate the public, because I think it's our responsibility to do it. And this public awareness, to raise awareness, it can have a social impact. It can shape public opinion. Of course, it's also a job of the journalists, of the media, but we also need to educate the media. We can influence policies. We can play an important role also even in law transformation, law reform about legal issues in research and in other things. I will show you an example at the end. And of course, very importantly, for those that they work on psychiatric and neurological conditions, to reduce the stigma for the patients and in general, to help patients and the society at large. Also, many times we just want to do it because we know what's the truth, and we want to debunk some myths. For example, I will show you later the myth about vaccines, that in the past there was a publication showing that vaccines could cause autism, but of course this was retracted. But it was the job of the scientists to really educate the public about vaccines and how important they are. Of course, it's also good for us. It's good to communicate our science because it enhances our skills. It helps us understand our science better and write this grant section that is important about dissemination and impact, evaluate the impact of our research. It can help us with funding and also to get out there and talk about what we're doing, find some collaborators, some funding, and new ideas. I think it's very good for everybody. And at the end, it can also bring us closer to our community, family, and friends, because at the end, they do understand in this way what we are doing and why we are in the lab or in a facility working with animals or other experiments. And of course, we can inspire students and we can have fun. We have had a lot of fun at the Hellenic Society for Neuroscience. I will show you a few pictures later. Some examples, as we said, about science communication. Of course, there are many different topics. Just a few of them are here. And we can hear more about communicating animal findings and animal experimentation. But there are other topics that are important, and some of them are also difficult to communicate. And where can you do that? Where can you communicate your science? And the answer is everywhere. We have done science communication and public awareness in many different venues. This is a picture from an island in Greece from a colleague that she organized an event a few years ago. We have done also science communication events even at music halls, theaters, bars, cafes, cultural centers, institutes, universities, even at the parliament, where we can really try to make a change with policy making, as I said, even at the subway, the metro. And also, of course, the media is a very good platform if we have access to the media and TV, newspapers. But of course, nowadays, everybody can write on social media and on the web. And how? Of course, we can just give a talk, a public talk, but this is not the only way. We can the most important for our topic today is that we can have lab visits and facility visits. We can open our lab. We can have scheduled, of course, visits when we could even have some students or some people from the public or the media to participate in some very simple experiments, or show a mouse or a rat being on an open field, or at a cage with an enriched environment. But you can see here that there are many different, we have even made the planetarium of the brain, and kids really enjoy being part of this activity, and contests, video making, photography, and others. So when, of course, you already know about Brain Awareness Week. That's happening every year in the second week of March, and it's an international happening. But there are also other occasions like the Researchers' Night that's happening in September, but also many national and international activities and events that are happening during conference or close to conference or other activities. And there is some funding. Also, FENS gives some funding with DAN Alliance for the Brain, and the Hellenic Society for Neuroscience has also gotten in the past an award about the dissemination and brain awareness activities. But what is happening where animals are involved, how things are getting a bit more complicated in the way that we're communicating our science? There are a lot of resources. You can find a lot at the of material at the website of the European Animal Research Association, that they are also really supporting this event today. And they say, and of course we all agree, and also FELAS agrees at the last conference, that we should be all open about our science, be transparent, and we can even show videos or have visits at the lab. And I think that's the way to go from now on, because this is the only way that the public can understand what we're doing. So some more practical tips, what we can do. As I said, we can be open, honest, and transparent about our work. And we can use pictures and videos. Of course, these pictures and these videos need to be good, and they need to be decent. You need to be very careful of what you are posting or what you are showing at the general public. But you can use videos of animals. You can see some examples at the website again of EARA and other also organizations. We need to be specific, not just say animals, be specific if you are using certain species, even if there are other mammals like primates or others, and also the procedures that you are using, because we said that we need to be honest, but try to tell a story to explain why you are doing this research. Be simple and short, but also show some empathy about the animals and about the work and about the patients, of course, that we are trying to help. And also, when we're giving a public talk, it's always good to try to be expressive and engaging so they can relate with us and the public can understand why we're doing this research. We can use some simple statistics and numbers and figures. Numbers are always very good if you want to persuade someone. You can start with numbers. I will show you an example at the end. And as I said, we can have open days at the lab. It's also very important, maybe you can even start with that or end with that, to explain the EU legislation that we all follow, the 3 R's of the reduction, refinement, and replacement, and that we all need to get permits for our experiments, get ethical permits at the national level, get personal permits like FELASA certifications, facility permits, that everything is very well regulated so the public feels safe that we really do our best to reduce the discomfort of the animals. And you need to explain that they are always watching what we're doing. There are veterinarians at these committees that we really value their work and their input. So make the public feel safe that there is a legislation around all of this that we are doing. And of course, EU undertakes several initiatives to try to reduce animal testing, but when this is possible, and find alternatives, and we all work for better alternatives, but unfortunately, these are not still there, especially about the brain. So we can engage in a discussion, let the public ask questions, explain, if we have the chance, explain that we're talking about animal experimentation only and not testing, because you will see at the end that sometimes there is confusion between animal testing for cosmetics or other reasons. But we're talking about experiments for research, for the brain, to understand the brain, to treat and diagnose. Talk about the patients, give specific numbers of patients that they are suffering from brain disorders. And of course, engage in a discussion, give the opportunity to ask questions, take time to explain, always be patient, polite, and calm, and give time to anyone that wants to express an opinion, even if it's different than yours. So that said, don't become, do your best not to become aggressive, defensive, ironic, rude. Try to be calm and as I said, open and transparent, and don't close doors, don't stop the discussion unless, of course, it's very bad and disruptive. And always don't be too technical, and always think again before you're posting something on social media. It's all about, it's very good to post things and talk about animal work, but we need to be careful and don't let anyone outside the lab to take pictures without any authorization, even if it's a student, a technician, or someone in the lab. They cannot take pictures and not post anything without permission. And at the last, I think I have 5 minutes, right? At the last 3 to 5 minutes, I want to show you an example of what happened a few weeks ago at the European Parliament. There was a hearing from an initiative, the European Citizens Initiative, because there were some European citizens that they gathered 1 million signatures against animal testing. And they had a hearing for the whole day at the Parliament at the end of May, and to talk about stop, as you can see here, save cruelty-free cosmetics, commit to a Europe without animal testing. But they are asking to stop animal testing and animal experimentation for everything, even for the brain, even for any diseases, in the next years. I think it's in the next 5 or 10 years. And so the European brain community had to react, and the initiative was taken by the European Brain Council, that you probably know. If you don't know, you can go online and see all the activities of the European Brain Council. FENS, as well as ECNP and many other societies, are members of EBA, of EBC, of the European Brain Council, and we really support this initiative. So they issued the Pledge for Science. It's a document about brain research and innovation in the EU, where it's explained about animal experiments, and how these are very important and how we cannot stop having them yet because the alternatives are not good enough yet, unfortunately. And this was signed by many different organizations, but still you can go online and sign as an individual or as an organization. You can see here also from, of course, FENS, Hellenic Brain Council, the Mediterranean Society, patient groups, and neurological and psychiatric societies, which is very, of course, good. So there was also a document which is specific about animal. It's a statement for the Brain Council. And you can see here the arguments, because we need to have arguments to say that, unfortunately, the alternatives like work on zebrafish or Drosophila or C. elegans or work on brain on a chip or organoids, they're very good, they're excellent, but unfortunately, they're not still enough to cure diseases and to understand the brain. And there we need also to explain that sometimes we need to do some basic fundamental research and try to understand the brain before we understand diseases, and before we understand the pathophysiology, we need to understand the neurobiology, and then we can make new treatments and have better treatments for all. And for that, we need still animal work. And that's the last document that I'm going to show you, that it was also launched for this initiative from the European Brain Council. You can see here that they explain very well, we all explain as we signed it, why we're using animals in brain research to understand the brain, but sometimes it's also good for the animals because they suffer from the same diseases that we suffer. So if we can cure the human diseases, then we can also help animals that they might have this kind of diseases. Of course, patients benefit, and the numbers are huge. You can see here that 84 million people in the European Union living with a mental health problem, around 15 million of children with epilepsy or some kind of disability. There's billions of euros that they are spent. The cost is huge for patients, caregivers, for the society in general. And so it's not only scientists and researchers. We are not doing that only for us, but it's for patients. And to finish, we explained very well the conditions, again, that I explained to you about the EU and the permits that we need to obtain. And of course, that we are trying to find alternatives. And so with this, I hope this was useful. Please ask questions, and thank you very much for listening. And I would like to thank also, of course, FENS again for this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christina. It was a great and interesting presentation indeed. So yes, please ask all your questions in the chat, and it's very important. There will be a Q&A response session at the end. And now we are pleased to welcome Roman Stilling. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Armelle, for the introduction. And first of all, I would also like to thank FENS especially for making this webinar possible. It seems to have made to attract a lot of people, and it seems to really hit a nerve. So I'm very thankful that FENS also shows that we are dealing with this topic very openly. There is a FENS communications committee, there's a FENS care committee, and together we can make this work and increase openness and transparency on this topic, especially in the European neuroscience community. So I myself, as I said, I'm a trained neuroscientist, but have moved to science communication about 7 years ago exclusively, and I'm sitting on the FENS care committee since the end of last year. And in this capacity, I'm talking to you today. I will switch gears a little. Thanks, Christina, for this wonderful talk. I especially like the do's and don'ts, which are very, very similar to those do's and don'ts that we usually offer to people in Germany here when we give talks and provide advice on how to deal with this topic. I would start off with something that is maybe a bit of a surprise to most of you, because when we talk about this topic of animal research in the neurosciences, then we usually have we talk about it as a problem. We talk about it as being very controversial and being very wary of, you know, disclosing and being very open with this. And we feel that there is political pressure, there's societal pressure, and so on. But what I'd like to point out in the very beginning is that I am very, very certain, and I hope that you all agree, but let's discuss this in the Q&A session further, that there is a consensus in society and also in politics. And this consensus goes something like this. So reduced to the very basics. If I say experiments using animals are currently indispensable for scientific and medical progress, and these experiments are, under certain conditions, which are to be debated, ethically justifiable. And I think that most of us would agree to this, and also most of the societies that we live in agree to this. So some of these conditions, just to name a few, is that these experiments are to create new knowledge, obviously, also that no alternatives are present, and harm for the animals is reduced to a very minimal level. For example, we are always talking, of course, about high quality research, thinking about reproducibility and validity of the research. Also, in case where we study human diseases, for example, that translation of our model systems is possible. So these are some of the conditions that make this societal and scientific consensus work. And this is also reflected in the directive that we have at the EU, the 2010-63 EU directive that was released in 2010 and then implemented in the national member states over the following 3 to 4 years. So this is basically enshrined, this consensus is enshrined in this directive implicitly. And it is also widely shared, not only in the EU, not only at the member state levels, but also worldwide. For example, the World Medical Association has the Declaration of Helsinki that mentions also animal research. There is the World Health Organization that mentions this implicitly. Also the World Organization for Animal Health. Many regulatory bodies would basically consider this consensus and build up their work on this. So the international regulators, international organizations that harmonize regulations on the international level. Here, just a few are named, but also the parliaments, most of the political parties would agree to this consensus. Scientific funding bodies and many more, just to name a few. I think this is a really broadly and widely shared consensus. So what's the problem? If we all agree, then why are we making this topic a problem, or why do we feel this is controversial? And I think one of a few reasons is when we look at policymakers, why do they feel this topic is a problem also for politics, is first of all, this topic to most politicians is rather unimportant. That may also come as a surprise because it's sometimes very heatedly debated, for example, in the European Parliament and in other parliaments. But if you look, for example, at animal welfare discussions in much more broad terms, then this topic becomes rather small, because, for example, here is just as an example, a graph of animal use in Germany, and all the dark blue that you see here, you don't need to read the details. All the dark blue here is animals used for food production. And this is, for example, in Germany, numbers from 2017, this is more than 500 million, that's with a B, more than 500 million chickens that were killed for food production, and many other animals. This light blue here are the pets that are being kept. This is the number of animals that have been hunted for food. Roadkill, for example, the light blue here is the hatchlings, the one-day-old hatchlings from chickens that are killed because they don't have the right sex. And this orange here, this is the animals that have been used for research. So putting this just in perspective makes the topic of animal welfare in the laboratory a rather unimportant topic for anyone dealing in policy with animal welfare in general. So on the other hand, when they are confronted with this topic, it's usually via petitions to change regulations, to make regulations more strict. Also, they're confronted with resolutions or inquiries by opposition parties. So this is usually a topic that is used by the opposition to, challenge the government. Also, of course, there's industry lobbyism. There's also very heavy lobbyism by animal welfare organizations or animal rights organizations even. And I want to point out two things that make this whole topic a challenge for policymakers, because often we deal with this topic as a separated topic and not really related to the research output. For example, if you look at this picture, there's a paraplegic man who can walk again thanks to a device that has been developed here at the PFL. It was a recent breakthrough. I think this was published in May this year. And when, of course, everyone's very happy about this result and this gets publicized and gets discussed and so on. So sometimes even also we discuss about the animal research that has been done before. And then we look at this as an isolated topic, and the connection is hardly ever mentioned. And I think that is one of the challenges that we face as a neuroscientific community, that we have to make this connection and say the output is fine, but look also at the methods, look at how we produce these results. Also, often this topic is unrelated to policymakers in terms of research excellence. For example, if you think at university rankings, if you think of, getting third-party funding like ERC grants and so on, everyone is very happy if the university does very well. But then how this money is generated, how it's used actually in the laboratories, that is hardly ever discussed, and it seems to be somewhat uncoupled. So the challenge with this consensus that we have, I think, is that part of the consensus is also that nobody really likes animal research, because by definition, animal research is involving animal harm or can involve animal harm. So the ultimate goal that's also enshrined in the European directive is full replacement. The question, however, is how to get there, when to get there, or even if there is a possibility to get there at all, or if this just always remains an ultimate goal as a utopia, for example. And the interesting thing is that during the past decades, this question on how to, replace animal research and animal testing has moved from being a scientific question, like which models to use, which is the best model for my research question, is it in vitro, is it in silico, is it in vivo, has moved to become a political question. And that is clear what we see nowadays, and that's the situation we're currently in. And this creates a narrative that feels like it's never enough regulation, it's never enough, something needs to be done. We need to move to this ultimate goal, and we need to be moving about it more quickly. And that often leads to some rather unrational actionism, I would call it. So, for example, 2 years ago in September 2021, there was this resolution in the European Parliament, and it was almost voted for unanimously in the whole European Parliament, that the Parliament demands from the Commission an action plan to end the use of animals in research and testing as soon as possible, and increase the pace of moving towards full replacement. The EU Commission drafted a very well crafted response, and I think it rightly said, well, this is a scientific question. We cannot, know when scientific breakthroughs will happen, so we cannot make such a plan as it was wished for. But this is the situation that we're in when and what politicians are and policymakers are dealing with this topic. So providing some facts to this debate, for example, if we look at the numbers of animals in Europe, this is from the latest report from the Commission. So starting from the implementation of the EU directive in 2015, we see that there is hardly any change. Maybe we do see a slight reduction over the years, but what we don't see actually is an increase in animal numbers. And this is often what is stated in public, that it feels like it's always getting more and more needs to be done to actually reduce the numbers. But on the other hand, we also need to factor in that the spending on research and the number of publications, the number of staff, the number of money that goes into research is ever increasing. And if we would, we would actually expect that this number would be actually going up, but it doesn't. It actually goes down at least a little. And so there is progress, and there is indication that the 3R principle does its work, and the directive works as it was intended. And this goes back much longer. This is data from Great Britain that has one of the oldest histories in terms of reliable data. So if we see that during the early 70s, there was a peak in animal use, and this was largely testing, not research, but testing of chemicals, testing of new drugs before they get into clinical trials and so on. And this has reduced over the years, and it's still going on. And if we look at this in the latest EU data, we actually do see that the testing, so regulatory testing in the EU, is one of the main driving forces for decreasing animal use. And this is largely due to also using replace methods and using other methods than using animals in toxicity and efficacy testing and so on. So if you actually look at this, within 5 years, there has been a decrease by 27%. And this is something that is hardly ever talked about. And I think we do need to emphasize that there is a difference between testing and research, and that in the testing domain, that is the one that's actually most discussed, and that is the one that most people think about when they think about animal testing, is this particular domain, and that there is actually progress. So things are happening. So what does this mean for communication and outreach, especially when we talk about the target audience of politicians, policymakers, decision makers? It means that we need to keep this topic alive in the public discussion, making it an important topic in a proactive way, and not only react to challenges from outside and from, for example, animal welfare or animal rights organizations. We need to, push this topic from our own perspective and control the story by pushing this. Also, relate the research to the animal research and the research questions that we're actually dealing with. I think brain research, and I think most of you are here to agree with me very much on this, is one of the most exciting topics. And it is also one that is still in its infancy, if we're really honest with each other. So I think research really is the door opener, and this also goes for politicians and policymakers. They are interested in brain research. They're interested in innovation and what we can do. And this is the door opener. This needs to take center stage, but then do not neglect that most or a lot of the data that we actually get in this type of research is taken from animal brains. What I also think is visibility of the researchers, of the research organizations, of the funding bodies, whoever is involved, is key. And I think this is really a situation that is changing. A few years ago, I think the main idea towards dealing with this topic of animal research in brain research was go into hiding, not really talk about it. But I think nowadays we increasingly get to a point where we agree that visibility is actually something that will help us promote this type of research. Clearly and honestly, I'm repeating what Christina already said, we need to show what is at stake if we follow this demands of for example, a full ban of animal research. And also, I think, and this is why I provided some of the facts, facts matter and they do need to enter the debate. Of course, we're always dealing with emotions. I don't want to take that away. I mean, whenever we talk about animals, we deal with emotions. It's an emotional topic, but facts matter in this debate, and this is extremely important. And with this, I would like to thank you very much. Stay updated, stay connected to FENS, and maybe we see each other next year in Vienna, where the care committee will also be present and very approachable. So thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A session now.
Yeah, thank you both of you. It was really clear, instructive. I've learned even some stuff, so thanks again. And I'm convinced that it will help many of us. So now I'm going to take the questions. So the first one. So hello from Addison. I have a question. Do we speak in European law of the fourth R, the rehabilitation? Thanks. I've never heard about it, because I guess there is a fourth R coming. Rehabilitation. Did one of you guys know about this?
I didn't know that the fourth R was rehabilitation. I think there is many concepts of additional Rs. There is 6R concept, 5R, 4R. Responsibility, for example, is one. Reproducibility is one. I've recently read a paper on 12 Rs already. So this concept is ever extending, and I think that's perfectly fine. But in the law and in European regulations, the 3R principle is enshrined, and I think that most of the other Rs are somewhat represented already in the 3R concept. Rehabilitation, I think, means rehoming, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yes,
for example, moving animals from the lab to private owners, and whenever that's possible, that's perfectly fine, I think.
It goes with rescue and release.
Okay.
So yes, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on that.
So the next question is from Hervé Boutin from INSERM at Tours in France. And so he said, thanks for your presentation. You were mentioning being able to show pictures of animals in their environment, but anti-vivisionists always show similar images of purposely selected gruesome experiments. In general, it's very old experiments. So we obviously continue to perform various procedures involving surgery that in some cases can be invasive. Members of the public are sometimes asking about these procedures, and we are not showing images or video of these procedures. To some, that make those us suspicious because, of course, they're hiding some procedures. How can we effectively communicate about this except repeating what we take great care in adhering to the 3 Rs?
I think that we can show some videos because even for humans, many times, I think I have seen videos from neurosurgeries, or of course, you need to respect some things. You cannot show everything. It cannot be all the procedure, but you can show a few things. I do think I think that's the idea of being open and transparent.
And also, as you said, I think telling a story and why we are doing this may help.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would answer, is that every picture needs context, and that is exactly why these horrible and gruesome pictures that the anti-vivisectionists use, because why they work, because there is no context. It's just the pure shock of looking at this picture and the pure emotion overwhelming anyone looking at it. I would say that we can actually show much more than we might think. I think people can handle more than we think, but of course there's a limit. And I think this limit is exactly when the emotional content of looking at a picture or a video is so overwhelming that no matter what context you provide, you cannot, make sense or regulate this type of emotion that is immediately happening. So I would say my prime example here is transcardial perfusion to make to prepare tissue for IHC. But you wouldn't show this on camera. Why would you do it? I mean, there's just a lot of blood involved, and of course it looks much more horrible than it actually is for the animal, because it's under anesthesia. But on the other hand, I'd say this is probably beyond the limit. On the other hand, I would say that some invasive imagery might work, provided that there's enough context, provided that there is, for example, in a video, a voiceover or someone telling exactly why something is done that is being done at the moment, or in a picture, what do we actually see, and why, what happened before, what will happen after, and so on. So this type of context actually, I think, is extremely important.
Perfect. We have a lot of other questions, so we have to continue. So does animal testing for brain-related topics has no need in future?
I think in a way we already answered that, and Roman said a lot about that. Probably it will be harder and harder in the future to do animal experiments. I think it will become like human clinical trials. They will have to be very well registered and regulated, and probably that's okay. It's just that we need to keep that in mind. I don't know if Roman has more on that as member of the care committee.
Well, talking about the need, so the question asked, do we need that in the future, animal testing for brain-related topic? I think there is a minimum that is, especially with the brain, we're in no position to actually model what we don't really understand in a dish or in a computer. So I think for the foreseeable future, there will be animal testing and research for brain related topics. So, yeah.
Another question from Sébastien Roux. Any advice for communication about NHP's experimentation? Thanks. I don't know what
yes,
is
for non-human primates, I think it's the same. We don't really differentiate. We can still show pictures and videos and explain very well why we need to do it in primates and what's the benefit. Also, one thing that I don't think I had the time to talk about is to give some examples of success stories and explain why some maybe treatments or some findings were possible because of this particular research on maybe non-human primates, how, for example, about vision, why this can be done only in non-human primates. I think that's the only way to go, and show some empathy, of course.
So the following question is, hello, thank you for your great talk, Dalla. For medical researcher, it is easy to explain why animals and not models are used. But a lot of research in basic research here is more difficult to explain why animals are used, when most of the research interest is driven by curiosity. How would you suggest to explain this without mentioning it could be helpful for patients, drugs, and so?
Yes.
Only understanding the brain could not be enough. Therefore, one could just use model organoids culture, I guess.
First of all, thank you. I think it's not only curiosity. I think there is always an ultimate goal, because we build on this knowledge. And again, we can, at least what I use, usually I tell people that the finding about neurogenesis in the brain came out from experiments that they were done in birds. So first we understood the songbirds and the brain of birds and other species, and we understood that there is neurogenesis happening there, and then we found that on mammals and humans, and maybe sometime soon we'll have some treatments on that. So we need fundamental research and basic research in order to understand everything. I think that's the main argument. Why not? To understand, not immediately, but build the knowledge. Or maybe so many other findings, even about dopamine or steroids and other things.
Yes, research is a lot of curiosity, but on purpose. I agree. And another question is, what do you think of people who consider that science goes too far? Where should we stop?
Well, I would say that this is always a matter of public debate that we need to discuss as a society. Like, what are we actually, consider ethical, and what do we consider unethical? And this is something that the scientists cannot figure out themselves. There need to be, guidelines and rules and regulations. We see this, for example, with genome editing in the germline. This is a topic where there is clear guidelines, for example, by the international research community, and with other topics, I think it's similar. There needs to be some discussion, but this needs to be informed by the scientists that tell people, okay, this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do, and some of the implications of the research that's being done.
So another question from Idris. So thanks for this webinar. I want to ask if scientifically acceptable for consideration conducting a research in a country that has lesser strictness than it comes to animal use in research, especially if that researcher lives in a country that makes it difficult to use animal in research. Thank you. That's a very good question.
Yes, I can say just two things. First, if they are helpful, that first of all, we need to respect the laws of the country and the permits of the country that we are doing the research. But if we get the European funding, then there is a special ethical committee at the European level. I was also part of that sometimes, about research ethics and integrity, where they really evaluate that as well. They evaluate the conditions of the research happening in other countries outside Europe, third countries, as they call them. So maybe that's helpful to answer the question.
Yeah, I would like to briefly add that we should do everything to keep the research here in Europe and do it under the rules and regulations that we have. And that is also something that would follow an immediate ban, that this type of research does not go away, would just move to somewhere else. And I think we need to make this clear.
Perfect. So another question. Yes, you want to add something?
Because we can also answer maybe the question about private companies, because it's the same thing, that they also need to respect the same regulations and take the same ethical permits, even if it's for private companies or education or institutes. It's not. So just to be fast. Sorry.
So it was a following question. I have to find another one. There are a lot and very long. These initiatives are about creating the optional environment for the process to happen as far as it is practicable, responsible, recognize that some research area pose a much bigger challenge than others. I didn't get the question. Maybe you have?
I think it's a statement that, okay, we agree.
So maybe you can look with me in the QR section.
Yes, about space, maybe Roman has some ideas about the space. What's the basic needs in terms of space for animal testing? So I guess the question is how much space we need to house the animals, or to...
Well, it depends on the animal.
Yes, there are very strict rules for that. And they're not written at the EU guideline.
An interesting question I have. What do you think about artificial intelligence and algorithms to reduce use of animals? That we already almost responded.
Yeah, I think they are great. All initiatives are great, and computational neuroscience, everything is very useful. But we'll see if there will be enough in the future. We're not there yet.
I think, yeah.
Yes, it's not possible to modelize something that we don't know. That's the whole point.
That's the issue. Yeah, exactly. But this will certainly happen. I mean, there's already a lot of research informed by, you know, artificial intelligence. So this will increase, I guess.
So thanks for this webinar from Karine. Is there a chance or a risk that despite being an alternative to animal use, cell culture using animal serum becomes prohibited?
I have never heard of anything like that.
Me neither.
But of course, there are initiatives to try to develop serum-free media for cell culture. And I mean, in terms of animal welfare, this is clearly something that we need to go for. But I'm not an expert in cell culture media, so I don't know what the status actually is at the moment. If there are enough serum-free options. As far as I know, serum is used in a lot of media, and also, especially for organoids, you need, for example, Matrigel. Yeah, this is how it is harvested from animals as well.
I think there is an interesting question also before that about the ethical frame, because I think that's a problem with all kinds of advocacy actions. Or there is a question how to deal with people who have a completely different ethical frame, like species egalitarianism, where a common ground is hard to find. How to present our views. Yes, I think that's very difficult. But it's not only about animal research. It's a problem with many different ideas where you have a totally different approach on things. And I think the best way is to show the data and the evidence, to talk about the numbers and try to be as convincing as possible.
Well, I think if it's about values, I think that is also something that needs more visibility, that the people doing this research or aiding in it, they need to show why they actually do this. Most of the researchers I have talked to have each their individual stories why they got into this type of research, and their morals and values. And if they don't match with someone you discuss with, well, that's fine. I mean, we all share individual different values, but we cannot convince each other about all of them. So
maybe one last question from Elizabeth. So she would like to know if there are guidelines for the use of animal models, and what criteria does most journal consider in evaluating manuscripts that use animal model?
I think I can answer that. Unfortunately, there are not really guidelines. We are trying to make some. Actually, there is an initiative from the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology about that, from the preclinical network, to make some standardization in preclinical research and make some animal protocols that they are universally accepted. But the argument is that this could maybe diminish discovery, and if we put some guidelines in that. But there are not really any guidelines yet, but I think they will be soon. It's this that we talked about before, about that maybe the research will become, at least for preclinical research, for testing, for evaluating drugs for preclinical research, we'll have some very specific protocols with like clinical trials. It will be like preclinical trials that they will have to be registered and use specific models. But for now, all the reviewers and the editors, they just evaluate on the way that they know, based on their own experience and knowledge, and of course, based on scientific publications.
So thanks a lot, but I think it's already time to end this webinar. But there are still remaining questions, so I don't know if it's possible to answer it later on, because the subject is very complex and fascinating. So thanks all of you for being here today, and from the speakers, of course, and the FENS again. So yes, FENS is answering that we can publish the replies on the website. Great.
Great, yes. And actually, because there is a comment about saying that Europe, that we said that they asked for immediate stop of animal experimentation. We didn't say that. I said that it will happen in many years. They asked this to happen in 10 years, maybe, or more.
Well, this ECI calls for a plan, right, to move towards an ultimate phase out. But the previous ECI called for an immediate ban. So, and there will be other ECIs in the future. So, I mean, obviously, there is the question of reaching this ultimate goal, and the question is how fast can we reach that? And I think this is the matter of debate.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.